Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gavin Woods. I'm the Business Development Manager at Aurion. So hopefully you're all muted, but hopefully you can hear me and it's not 45 minutes of John and I just chatting to ourselves about trends. There is an option during the webinar to ask a question. So while John presents, I'll be fielding some of the questions. So the purpose of today's session is really a follow-on from our series of masterclass events that we ran. I know that some of you were maybe able to attend that and maybe have some questions for John about the session. So he'll be doing largely the same content, a few new aspects. If you weren't able to attend the masterclass, hoping that you find today very interesting. So we're going to field questions during the end, but without further ado, I will hand over to John and let him introduce himself.
Well, hello everybody, welcome to this webinar on this sunny afternoon in Belfast. We're running this from Belfast. Yes, so this is, today you've got virtual John. So I was involved in helping run the masterclasses we ran actually in Dublin and Belfast. So this is our sort of online version of that. So I'm a learning architect and non-exec director here at Aurion. I'm also chair of the eLearning in the UK. I'm not sure whether some of you may be eLearning members. We ran our very successful first conference on the 11th of November. Maureen spoke there, and we had a really good day. Hopefully, if you did turn up, you'd come along and join us again next year. So I definitely recommend, if you're not already a member of the eLearning, it's worth joining. It's you can join for free as an associate member, or for just £29 as a full member, in which case you get to attend all of our free events in the year. Sadly, most of them are based in England, although last year we did have one in Edinburgh as well. But maybe there's a potential to I'm quite keen on thinking maybe having a sort of an event maybe in Dublin and also in Belfast, possibly in 2016. We also, the eLearning are what we call the judging partners for the eLearning Awards. So in September I was on the judging panel. I judged two categories on the eLearning Awards. Very well, lots and lots of submissions, some really great entries. If you get a copy of eLearning Age, all the award winners have been announced for this year in eLearning Age. So that's a very sort of valuable thing to be involved in. Good. Okay, that's a bit about me. So we're going to run in the next 20-25 minutes through some 10 key trends I think that we'll see. We're already seeing some of now, but we're going to see hopefully a lot more of in 2016. So some of these things you'll probably think, oh yes, they're definitely going to take off. Some maybe not so much, but at the end we'll try and pick up maybe what the trends you think will be important to your organizations in 2016. Now, I often start presentations with this single slide because sadly I think a lot of our clients think e-learning is like this. So we have this guy sat in the high chair putting in all this information into the machine, what we tend to call the LMS, the Learning Management System. And then there's a poor instruction designer churning this stuff out, and then it's going through the wires into the learners' heads. Now, a lot of clients think this is the way e-learning works. Of course, it doesn't work quite like this. But actually, this was a drawing made in 1899. So it was a vision of the future, and so it was how a French cartoonist saw e-learning, what learning would look like in the year 2000. And actually, he wasn't that far wrong, apart from the fact he didn't quite foresee the advent of wireless. Sadly, his idea of what the Kindle would look like hasn't quite turned out like that. So I'm going to cover 10 key trends. So we're going to look at resources, not courses, gamification and games, the explosion of devices. We're going to take a quick look at responsive design for e-learning. We're going to take a quick look at interactive video. We're going to look at authoring in the cloud. We're also going to take a very quick look at Tin Can, or the Experience API. That won't be too technical, but just a very brief overview of what Tin Can might do for us in 2016. We're going to look at the new blend, what I like to call the invisible LMS, and finally something which I'm sort of a big fan of is we're going to look at that, what it means to be in 2016 a self-directed learner. Good. Okay. So one thing I'm quite interested in is the idea of the tipping point, and that's the point at which we do more learning in our organizations online than we do offline in the classroom. So these are some statistics from the eLearning industry website. There's a link there. At the end, we'll make this presentation available to you all, and you can we'll send you a PDF version of all these slides. So we'll do that once we've finished this presentation. So yeah, it's interesting because we haven't quite caught up with the amount of we're 28.5% online as opposed to 47% instructor-led, but there's quite a lot happening here in blended learning. If we look down at mobile is quite small at the moment, but if we add all those together, actually we're doing a lot more learning online. So I'd like to ask you all of you on this webinar, to what extent are you close to this tipping point? So Gavin's going to kick off a poll. So if you can just please answer that question.
%71% so far.
Okay, we're at
managed to find the full question.
71%. That's good. That's good.
We'll give it just a few more seconds.
Excellent. So yeah, so that's very encouraging. So certainly over half of you are very well on the way, but want to do more, which I think is my feeling in the e-learning industry now, where we've all got started, but we want to know how we can really make it fly. There's 20% who are just getting started, and then there's a 30% there who used it, but there's still some resistance. Good. Okay, that's good to see. That's a very positive result, I think. Okay, so here we are. So the first trend I'm going to look at is resources, not courses. So there's a big push now in the e-learning industry as to whether we should be building courses or is a better thing to do to build a resource. So probably the way I describe it is, so on the right-hand side we have those blocks neatly organized. So in some ways, if we're going to put the course together, we take what we want our learners to do, and we craft that into a course, starting at A and running up to Z. But on the left end, we have our resources. So actually, do we put all these resources together and create a course, or is it more effective to actually to lead them as a set of resources and not bother with trying to craft them into a course? So one of the things that I like to consider is what we call the moments of need. Bob Mosher has created done a lot of work around what we call the five points of need. Personally, I prefer 3. So the first point of need is learning something you may need in the future. So say you're being promoted to be a project manager, and you want to learn about agile project management. So you might go on a 1-day or 2-day course to learn about that. That's something that you don't know exactly what you need to know, but you need to have something that you're going to hopefully use in the future. Alongside that, then we have something we need now. So maybe I'm a project manager and I've been asked by my manager to put together a stakeholder map. So actually, I now need to know now, this minute, how to put together a stakeholder map. And the final moment of need is how to solve a problem. So I've got a problem. How do I, what can I do to solve this problem? And probably, the learning something you need in the future is what we call just in case, whereas the other two are just in time. So probably for the just in case, we're looking at creating maybe a course, but for the other two needs, actually a course is probably not the right thing. If we need to know how to create a stakeholder map, it's very hard jump back into the project management course. So in that case, we need just in time. Another thing that's driving the move away from courses towards resources is the idea of microlearning, or sometimes called bite-sized learning. So what's driving this? One thing is cost. So clients want shorter e-learning because it's perceived as being cheaper. And when I first started developing e-learning programs, they were 2 hours long. Nobody ever has an e-learning program now which is anywhere near that length. The other thing is attention span. There's a lot of idea that especially the younger generations, Generation X and Y, don't have a very long attention span. So a lot of clients want things to be shorter and sharper. The other thing is people are time poor. They're learning while they're at work. So actually they don't have time to take 2 days out and go on a course. What they want is to be able to have learn on the job alongside what they're doing. And the final driver is flexibility. So by having lots of resources, they can be used in lots of different ways. They haven't got to be you haven't got to do the entire course in order to get value from those things. Good. Okay. Well, trend 2, something we're all very aware of in e-learning, is the explosion of devices. So in the old days, we had a desktop PC and with a certain screen resolution, and that was it. Today, people have a multitude of different devices, and they want to learn. They want to learn on all of those devices. There's actually one device missing here. I want to ask. Maybe you could type into what device you think is missing. It's quite a new device. That device is a smartphone, or generally wearables. So whether we're not seeing any particular demand from customers to think about learning on a smartphone, but I can imagine smartphones will be part and parcel of some sort of delivery in the future.
Someone got very advanced. Fred there commented VR headset, which I suppose is one we're starting to see.
Yes, actually VR headset. Yes, that's yes. I think I judged the simulations and virtual environments category at the eLearning Awards this year, and none of them actually used it, but certainly I think they were considering using it in the future. So we live in a multi-device world. So we have all these devices, but actually, how we use these devices varies quite a lot. And I think one of the best, most interesting reports come out of Google is this URL. This is what Google did a lot of work on how people use their various devices. It's about a couple of years out of date now, but I imagine they'll update in the future. It doesn't, as you see, include smartphones. I imagine in the future it will. So, but what's interesting is we tend to spend longer on the bigger screens. So we spend a lot longer on our laptop than we might spend on our smartphone per interaction. And Google mainly did this in connection with consumer behavior. So they weren't specifically looking at learning, but it's interesting to think about in the same way when we're thinking about how people learn or want to learn. So one of the things that Google came up with was actually it's the context drives device choice. So depending on how much time we have, the goal we want to accomplish, where we are, and also our attitude and state of mind. So if I want to learn how to sort something out on PowerPoint, I'll quickly go onto YouTube and find it out. But if I maybe want to learn about how to do better presentations, then I want something a bit bigger. So I'm looking more for a course for that second need, whereas the first need, I'm looking at a resource that I can find quickly and use quickly. So I think that's very so. Although this is very much aimed at consumers, it very much also applies to learning. What sort of context are our learners in when they need to access learning? And the other thing then is the idea about whether something is spontaneous or planned. So I think, for example, our smartphones are used on a very sort of something comes up we need to do, like we're on the way to the station, we need to find the time to train, but we're going to plan a rail trip around Europe, and chances are we wouldn't start planning that on our smartphone. We'd sit down at our laptop or a tablet and do that in a more relaxed state of mind. So I think it also applies very much to learning. So to what extent are we learning? Are we planning to learn, the just in case, or what sort of learning are we doing where we're just spontaneously responding to something, a problem or a just in time need? And finally, to complicate things even more, is we tend to multi-device. We tend to use multiple devices at any one time. So I'm sure you've all been there, setting up the TV with your smartphone and or your tablet. So we have this sort of idea of using multiple devices together. I think that's very important for learning. So I think we need to be aware that learners may be using multiple devices, not just one device at a time. Okay, so trend 3, responsive design. So in order, primarily, this is been driven by these multi-devices. So as you are probably aware, just taking a normal e-learning module and scaling it down, fit on a smaller screen doesn't work. Generally, it works okay for tablets. We develop a lot of e-learning using articulate storyline. And actually, you know, they work. Those modules work fine on a tablet, providing some of the technical issues are sorted, like the, for example, it's published in HTML5. But generally, the screen works okay for those sort of applications. But it just will not work on a smartphone. The screen is too small, and generally, it's the wrong orientation as well. So responsive design is a response to actually deliver learning content on multiple devices. What happens is, of course, it reflows, it reformats depending on the device screen. But also, interestingly, in responsive design, we can leave things out. So if we have a complex graphic on the smartphone, we can leave it out. So whereas something might look more like a course on a large screen, on a smartphone, we can make it look more like a resource. So probably the key product at the moment in the e-learning area is a thing called Adapt. The Adapt framework, an open source framework. Heavily initially supported by Kineo in the UK, but Adapt is available to everybody. It's an open source framework, so anybody can download and use Adapt. At the moment, it's quite challenging to use. It needs a bit of be able to. It's quite technical aspects to using Adapt, but we are hopefully in 2016 going to get an authoring tool for Adapt, which will bring Adapt into the remit of you know, people who are used to developing courses in articulate storyline. That link there, that's an excellent link. That's so you can sign up for the Australian. This was an award winner last year for the eLearning Awards. You can sign up with the Australian government. This is their anti-doping training, all developed in Adapt. Great example of responsive e-learning. So you have to sign up, just you know, but it's just tick a few boxes. It's fine. It's open to everybody, and that's a great way to have a look at that. What responsive e-learning, how it works, and what it does. Now, my only slight issue with responsive e-learning is it's harder to build, and also it's a little harder to use. I always say my mum could use e-learning. Using responsive products like this anti-doping needs a bit more ability to be able to scroll and move around the screen. So maybe it's a bit harder to use than standard click next e-learning. Okay, so trend 4, the rise of video, rather the continued rise of video. So actually a lot of learning platforms today, this is an example of Udemy. So a lot of learning platforms these days use video as their primary delivery mechanism. So they mix video with resource downloads, forums, and things like that. So a lot of the MOOCs use video. So video has become a sort of a big driver delivering learning content. But actually, video has a lot more to do. So here at Aurion, we do a lot of explainer videos. So we use videos as part of our sort of e-learning build. So typically we'll embed an e-learning a video into an e-learning module. So we use video for what it's good at. I mean, the one problem we have with video is it's not interactive, but actually that's changing. So we are now seeing more use of video interactive. This is where we have a video layer, and on top of the video there's an interactive layer. So I don't know if you've seen this particular product. It's called it's from the Life Saving Society. It's called, if you look at it, it's at lifesaver.org.uk. A great example of using interactive video in a learning context. So it's a scenario-driven learning program. Once again, it's free to use. It's available as an app, or you can view it on your desktop or laptop. A great example of using interactive video, and this won many awards at the eLearning Awards back in 2014. And there are now increasingly more tools that are supporting interactive video. So this one called Exaltive is one that's worth looking at. It's it's fairly low cost tool to use. Certainly, we're playing with some of these interactive video tools and seeing what they can do for us in 2016. Trend 5, gamification and games. So hardly a day goes by without some e-learning company telling me that they now do games. So primarily, probably we're talking in e-learning in 2016 about gamification. So in other words, what can we use to increase motivation, to get learners to engage more in our e-learning? And sometimes it's seen as sweetening the pill, but actually, if you really understand the mechanics of gamification, they really can genuinely help learners stick to what they're doing and really work at their learning. So things like points, badges, levels, leaderboards, and particularly challenges are all great instruments to help people engage with our learning content more effectively. And moving into games a bit more, things like clear goals and rules of play, a compelling narrative. So Maureen talked a lot in Aurion about storytelling. I think it's a really key aspect of games and gaming. And also challenging but achievable tasks, which I think is, those sort of things really work well in a learning context. Learners like to have challenges that they can solve, so that plays really well into a sort of gamification and game approach. The simplest place to go initially is to just use an LMS which has got gamification built in, and this LMS from Growth Engineering has won a lot of awards in the UK, and that's what I call a heavily gamified LMS. So it's definitely worth having a look at. It's probably, from my perspective, probably takes things a bit too far. But it's interesting to see how it works, and it gives you a good insight into maybe how things might be moving in the future. The only problem with that is obviously if your LMS is gamified, then ideally your content needs to be built in a similar sort of way. There's a lot more. For example, you out there, some of you are probably using Moodle. We use Moodle here as well, and Moodle has got things like badges. So one of the classic aspects of gamification is using badges, and Moodle also supports Mozilla Open Badges. So those are badges that are sort of can be shared across the web. So a good book on this topic is The Gamification of Learning Instruction by Carl Kapp. That's really good because it focuses specifically on gamification in learning and instruction. And there's a couple of links there. The eLearning Heroes link is a really good article on the Articulate website in the eLearning Heroes about gamification, how you can add gamification to your storyline modules. There's some really nice, it's only a single article, but some really nice tips and tricks there. And then that bottom link is an example to some gamified e-learning modules. Good. So moving on to trend 6, the experience API. So what used to be called Tin Can, sometimes it's still called Tin Can, probably because it's a bit more memorable than the experience, or X API. So the whole idea of the experience API in some ways ties in with our accessing learning on multiple devices, the idea of having more resources rather than courses. So the idea of the experience API is it captures all of that. So no matter what we do, whether we write a blog or we comment on a blog or whether we access something or download something, no matter where we do that on the web, that can be captured as part of our learning experience. And in the case of the experience API, is stored in what's called the learning record store, and then the learning record store can be accessed by multiple LMSs. So this technology, I think, is going to make great leaps forward in 2016 and beyond. Ultimately, it will hopefully kill off SCORM. Trend 7, so authoring in the cloud. Maybe some of you are already using cloud authoring tools. So they've over the last few years, they've been growing. A lot more new entries into the market now start out on the cloud. So tools like Elucidate, Nimble Author, and Shift are all cloud authoring tools. So they're interesting in lots of ways. They for a start, they're mobile ready out of the box. Some of them responsive, some aren't. but certainly they view the world as being a multi-device world. So a lot of them are now publishing straight to HTML5. There's no Flash involved in any of these tools. The other big advantage is with collaboration. So as a team working together on an e-learning project, it's on the cloud. You build it on the cloud, and you press a button, and it's published on the cloud. So they're really powerful when you're involved with collaborative projects and building e-learning. And because they're built in the cloud, they're already working in the cloud. So there isn't this sort of issue about getting it onto the LMS and getting it working on the LMS. So definitely recommend all of these tools have free versions you can use for a limited period. Definitely recommend having a look at some of those if you're looking at a new authoring tool. I mean, we use here a particular Storyline, and that's a great tool, but there's no reason why you can't use that tool alongside some of these other tools. And I think in 2016 we'll see a lot more of these tools. And ultimately, I would imagine sometime in the future, Articulate will also have its own cloud authoring solution. I mean, I don't know about that, but certainly I would imagine that they must be thinking along those lines at some point. So Trend 8, the new blend. Well, why the new blend? Well, blended learning is something that I've heard a lot of people talk about, but very rarely see. So in the old days, it may be, oh, you do a quick e-learning module, then turn up a one-day course, or you download something and then turn up on the course. But actually, the new blend is a lot different to that. So that's mixing things like multi-device learning with resources and courses. Different learning strategies, different channels, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. There's a whole range of ways now we can put together a learning, what I call a learning intervention. Using lots of ways of blending the different technologies and channels. I don't know if anybody have ever done a MOOC. I definitely recommend this is having a look at the Future Learn MOOC, which is used by a lot of universities in the UK and is heavily promoted by the Open University. Definitely go on to Future Learn. And there's a great course at the moment called Blended Learning Essentials. It's free. I'm actually on this course at the moment. I'm on week 5. I'm a bit behind with my coursework, but it's a very good course.
Can you just explain, John, what a MOOC is?
So a MOOC is a massive open online course. So personally, ignore the massive, ignore the open. It's just an online course. So you can, I mean, generally the MOOCs are free, and of course the ones developed by Future Learn are free. So definitely worth signing up. It's really to see how they put a course together using a sort of using a blend. It's all online, but the way they blend different elements, different third-party tools, videos, discussions, etc. The way they do that is really interesting, and it's a really good example of what I call the new blend. And I think what the definitive book on this at the moment is Clive Shepherd's. Probably most of you have heard of Clive Shepherd. So he's an ex-chair of the ELN. Started one of the big e-learning companies in the UK many years ago, and his book More Than Blended Learning is an absolutely excellent sort of tour de force on bringing all these things together into one place. Okay, so Trend 9 is the invisible LMS, one of my pet favorites here. So I think one of the things that I struggle with these days is some of the horrible LMS we have to navigate through in order to access our learning. So I think we're seeing a bit like the invisible computer. So we want to be able to access our learning without the idea of having to sort of overcome all the barriers of the LMS. And the LMS does a great job. It lets learners connect with their learning, but also does a bad job in that sometimes we talk to clients that their learners haven't been able to see a course or haven't been able to get on that course. That's because they haven't got the right permissions or the right access rights or the right role. So I think in future we're seeing a lot more of the what we call the invisible LMS. So people will be accessing learning in all sorts of different places, supported by the Experience API. So we'll learn in lots of different places. That will still be tracked and reported on, but we haven't always got to go to the corporate LMS in order to do our online learning. And the LMS can be responsive too. So for example, Future Learn is a great example of a responsive invisible LMS. So once again, having a look at Future Learn and some of the courses on there, it will be quite insightful if you're looking at what an LMS of the future might look like. So finally, trend 10, the self-directed learner. So I think increasingly these days we're seeing learners wanting to take charge themselves. Particularly if we're using approaches like resources rather than courses, then clearly the learners will direct themselves as to what resources they use when. So the old way of maybe compiling resources into a course and forcing learners through that course is one way of doing things, but actually, well, maybe we make all the resources available with good signposting, good curation, and let learners decide for themselves what they want to access. So in the old way of instruction and teaching was characterized by the word pedagogy. More recently, certainly in e-learning, we work with more andragogy. So the idea that andragogy is pedagogy for adults, and that adults learn slightly differently to children. So they have some certain other aspects they need to take into consideration in order to learn. But I think one of my words for 2016 is hudagogy, and that basically is learning for oneself. So taking charge of one's own learning, so being one's own teacher, deciding what I know already, what I don't know, what the gap is, how I, as an independent learner, am I going to fill those gaps. And so for me, a lot of the technology, a lot of the approaches we're looking at with things like with the Experience API, resources, the multiple devices, the invisible LMS, all this is playing into the hands of a much more self-directed learner. Good. So the final question was, we did have a poll set up. Is that set up,
Yeah.
Gavin?
Yeah, I'll just open that.
So if you could, we put in 5 of the trends we've covered. So what I'd like you to do now is just choose, which of the three of those you think are most relevant to your organization in 2016. So just choose 3, the top 3 for your organization in 2016.
Okay, just a few more seconds.
Good, excellent. So, great use of mobile devices, 40%. More use of blended approaches, excellent, 73%. So I think that's really interesting. So personally, definitely recommend you buy Clive's book, because that's quite insightful as to what a blend means, and what I call a new blend. More resources instead of courses, excellent. I think that's this idea that you do more just in time rather than just in case. Good to see. Little less on oh no, still quite high, more bite-sized. I think bite size plays into that resources thing. I think if you're going to do bite-sized, it's much more likely that you're going to build a resource rather than a course. And more use gamification, that's probably the lowest one of all on 27%. Okay, that's interesting. Good, that's very good. Thank you very much. Good. Well, that concludes our presentation. Okay, Gavin. So, do we have any specific questions we're going to look at in the next 10 minutes or so?
Well, if nobody asks one, John, I'll ask you a couple. If you do want to pose a question to John, maybe you were at one of the sessions we did, and you've been thinking about things in practical terms, or you've just got a general question. If you want to pose a question, there should be a little box within the tool itself. I'm going to pose you a difficult one to start with, John.
Thank you, Gavin.
What do you think? Obviously, some of these trends we would have heard about in maybe if we'd done a similar presentation last year.
Absolutely.
Are there any trends that have maybe fallen by the wayside over the last 12, 18 months that you would have thought or any that you would have seen a lot more prevalent?
Yes, it's interesting. So yeah, so a trend, for me, a trend is a trend. So it's not a one-off necessarily. It's not a one-off flash in the pan. It's something people think that might be useful, and then they try and use it, and it either takes off and becomes useful, or it doesn't. So I'm buying a new TV, and I know 3D TV apparently was trending a few years ago, and is now no longer trending. I think most of these things. So blended learning is a good example where actually we've talked about it for a long time, but we're now, I think, only just getting a head around what it really means. So I think it was interesting from your response there. Actually, you are trying to do more of a blend. I think that's something that I think we are going to see more. We've had blended learning for a while, but actually I think now we're learning actually, especially these MOOCs, for example, they've done a lot of good work in exploring what a blend really means. So I think that's something that we are, although maybe we might have heard it mentioned five years ago. I think the time has come where we were actually able to do it.
So we've got a question here from Clanice, John. She says, any thoughts on the flipped classroom? It seems to be coming of age.
Yes, flipped classroom. What flipped classroom is part of that blended thing. So of course, I mean, and I spend a lot of my time looking at what's happening in education, and there's strangely a big divide between education and corporate workplace learning. But the MOOCs are really good on that. So yes, I think the flipped class is definitely coming of age. I mean, it's a great way to get into blended learning. So if I'm spending a day, if I'm, for example, going to work on a customer service program with some of my employees, then if I'm going to bring them into a room for half a day or a day, then I really want to do something very, very powerful and experiential. I want to do role plays with them. So before they get into that room, I want to make sure that they're ready. So for me, the flipped classroom is an ideal way to think about your blend. So yes, the flipped classroom is definitely something we're going to see more of.
Okay. What would you say, John, is the biggest challenge for someone, maybe in a small team who's developing e-learning themselves for their organisation? What the biggest challenge?
Yes, well, the biggest challenge probably is if you're doing e-learning 10 years ago, then you just had you buy a tool like Articulate Studio, you convert your PowerPoint, and off you go. And that pretty much was e-learning. You publish it as SCORM and put it on your LMS, and that was e-learning. One of the problems, as we've seen today, with all these new things coming in, multi-device, responsive design, the different technologies, the Experience API, the new blend, that's making it much more challenging if you are just getting started. So I think one of the messages I'm still a big believer in buying a tool like Storyline and developing some nice, simple click next with some nice interactions, some good instruction design. Those things are still bread and butter things that people need in organizations. So probably what I'd say is walk before you can run. So I'm very cautious of doing a presentation like this that people who are just starting out go, oh my God, it's so complicated. I mean, I do a lot of the capability building at Aurion, and we get people who are coming on the courses who their organization just bought Storyline, and they were a trainer last week, and this week they're an e-learning developer. So now it's impossible for that person to get up to speed that quickly. So very much, yeah, I believe in walk before you can run. What we've been through today are trends that most of what people are still doing e-learning is still using Storyline. But certainly, these are things you need to keep an eye on, and maybe, if you don't use them in 2016, aim to use them in 2017.
Yeah, I think there's certainly options. Here at Storyline, here at Aurion, sorry, we would use Storyline. We also develop custom content and HTML5. HTML5 custom content, if mobile devices is a specific requirement, is probably from a technical aspect the safest way to go, because authoring tools generally are still catching up with that. We've got a question here sort of on technical barriers, I suppose, that people see in large organizations. Anne asks, do you think the problems that we have with browsers, e.g. IE8, preventing users from seeing some resources will become less of a problem in 2016?
I really hope so. And I think Microsoft are, of course, the problem was IE. And so, I think Microsoft have finally got their act together with adopting the standards. In the old days they did what they wanted. Nowadays they're having to be a bit more responsive to to what's going on around in the bigger, wider world. So yes, I'm hopeful that certainly with the latest versions of IE, in fact, the IE won't exist as a separate product anymore. Those problems will hopefully go away. I mean, it is a nightmare if somebody says to us they're on some sort of legacy LMS, on some legacy OS. Yes, those I sympathise, but hopefully those things will start to go away as we become a more open, adopt more open standards.
Anybody got any other questions? Feel free to post. Oh, here we have one. Martin asks, well, thanks for the presentation. I've got some other good feedback, but I'll save that for you for after, John. Martin says, student engagement is measured in many ways. Self-directed learning is interesting and ultimately measured by success in the assessment. Am I right? I could reread that for you if you want that again.
Yes. I mean, you are right. I mean, the fact you mentioned student indicates you're from education space there. We have to be very careful about who we think our learners are. So if I take a bunch of learners, there'll be some who are very self-directed learners. So if you've been to university, you've sort of done X degree, then generally you are able to, you have the skills to learn. In fact, I was on a website recently where we need to upskill people in how to learn. In other words, teaching them how to be self-directed learners.
So that was Martina. Apologies to Martina, your full name wasn't showing on my tiny screen. So
yeah, Martina. So I guess Martina, you're working in education. So I think generally, in education or in CPD, learners hopefully are more self-directed. They're not just learning to tick a box. They're learning because it's important to their role. So for me, I'm a very sort of positive person. So for me, I think when it comes to learners, you give learners what they need and then get them to decide what learning they need to do. So don't force them to an e-learning module having to tick every box or click every reveal. Say, look, here's the learning, here's an assessment or something diagnostic. So if you pass a diagnostic, don't worry about the learning. So I think we need to treat our learners more as adults, and that applies whether they're in CPD or whether they're in a call center.
Okay, well, somebody who's maybe at the start of their learning journey, Niall asks, any advice for someone new to the industry with hardly any experience with e-learning or qualifications which associate with e-learning? So maybe that idea of somebody who's just moving into work in the area.
So the first thing I'd say is join something like the ELN, because we very much sort of help hopefully get people up to speed. There's not really
sort of our jargon buster for a start. So on the Aurion website now, you'll find our sort of top tips booklet. So there's lots of sort of mini articles in there. There's a few jargon busting terms, but probably the biggest thing I would say, John, maybe you back me up on this, is to don't be afraid to ask questions, either of other organizations. So networking is great, or suppliers like Aurion. There's no obligation if you want to ask questions at any time. We're happy to answer them.
No, and also, I do that. It is quite challenging now, suddenly entering into the e-learning space. So one of the things we do in Aurion, we run courses. So I personally run instructional design, and we do courses on Storyline. Also, if you're going to use a tool, for example, I don't know what tool you're planning to use, but if you're using a tool like Articulate Storyline, their site, the eLearning Heroes site, is absolutely brilliant. Tom Kuhlman, if you follow Tom Kuhlman, he's one of their product support champions. You follow Tom Kuhlman's blog. They are very, very focused on helping people who are just getting started, making good e-learning, and that's definitely a great first port of call. Otherwise, drop me an email, and I'll give you my little favorite book list.
Okay, so I put my email address into the chat, so if anybody has any further queries,
please
John's would follow the same format, so john.curran@aurionlearning.com. We will be making the recording available of today, but if anybody has any last burning question they want to ask, we're happy to field that. Otherwise, that will be bringing our session today to an end. So this is probably the first time John and I have worked as a double act on the webinar tool.
It is. So we normally, Kira is normally here, but she's off today, so we're learning as we go.
The fact that we got through 10 trends and a few questions and everybody seems to be able to hear us is a minor success.
So. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, folks.